G'day, I'm Owen, and you've joined this week's edition of the Pub Test, where we are continuing our Jack the Ripper Suspect series. And in this week's episode, we are looking at Hyam Hyams. I believe that's how you say it. We may refer to him as Double H, not to be confused with Triple H, the professional wrestler. But if you think that we should look at Triple H, because let's face it, every other bludger seems to be on the list, well, we'll look at the evidence and see if maybe he could have been a potential suspect. But let's get back on track to look at Hyam Hyams. Now, we have considered the attitudes of people back around Whitechapel at this particular time, around the 1880s. Homophobia was fairly rampant, we could say. But also there was the issue with a bit of anti-Semitism. And it stems from the fact that a lot of Eastern European Jewish people were moving to the area, and there was a conflict between what we would call locals and these immigrants. We've already considered Leather Apron, John Pfizer, and how he was arrested because everyone said, well, it's a Jewish person doing this. And there were some really weird theories about what Jewish people were doing as regards sacrifices, and that's why these murders were happening. All of it was baseless. But here, Hyam Hyams, Double H, well, he was a Polish Jewish person. Yet, that is not the main reason why he makes this list. We'd have to say, as regards raising the reputation of Jewish people in the area, this bloke didn't do it. In fact, he took that reputation and probably plunged it off a cliff. So we're going to actually look at where he ends up before we go back and look at the Whitechapel murders. It was in 1888 that he was taken into custody and then sent to an asylum due to these delusions and other things to do with alcoholism it was put down to. It must be noted that our friend here, Double H, did suffer from epilepsy, and apparently more as these epileptic fits happened, the worse his condition was getting. So he was attacking people. He was hurting people. So he's put away in an asylum. What is of note here, though, is that it showed that he could control some of his behaviours. Because after being in these places for anywhere from a month, they'd say, well, he's cured. Because he could actually show himself to be quite normal. And say, well, there's nothing wrong with him now. And they'd let him out. And then the behaviour would happen again. They'd bring him back in. This happened a few times. Until eventually they said, well, that's it. You're locked away. And he ends up passing away in 2013 due to some epileptic fits and other things, so it's stated in the records. And throughout all that time, he's going backwards and forwards in this mental state of being considered quite a likable person that you could easily get along with, to someone who carried on with some very strange behaviour, hurled abuse, used all sorts of language, and if he could get his hands on any type of weapon, he would attack people. He stabbed a staff member in the neck during his stay in these institutions. But that's not the worst of what he did. It's shown in the records that part of the reason why they locked him up in the first place was because he attacked his own mother with a hatchet. Yes, his own mother he attacked. He got married around 1881, so he hadn't been married all that long. He had 2 children. And the wife says they lost a couple of children due to violent attacks that he was doing to her. And yes, he also stabbed her in the neck with a knife. As I say, this person, Hyam Hyams, was not raising the reputation for Jewish people in the area. But how does he make this list? Where does he fit into the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, in one census, he is stated as living in 28 or 29 Mitre Street. And it was out the shop front of 8 Mitre Street where the body of Catherine Eddowes was found. So he knew the area. He was in the area at the time. Remembering he wasn't locked up until December of 1888. And that's the other thing. The Mary Kelly murder happening in November of 1888. It was only 7 weeks after her attack that he's now off the streets. And by all reports, no more Whitechapel murders associated with Jack the Ripper happened after that. And if we remember back to the profile, it says that the murders will only stop once the Ripper's either dead or caught. And so they would point to saying, well, he's now locked up in an institution. These attacks have stopped. Is that coincidental? And additionally, this is what a former investigator actually said about what he thought who Jack the Ripper was. And I'll read his statement. He said, one did not have to be a Sherlock Holmes to discover that the criminal was a sexual maniac of a virulent type, that he was living in the immediate vicinity of the scenes of the murders, and that, if he was not living absolutely alone, his people knew of his guilt and refused to give him up to justice. During my absence abroad, the police had made a house-to-house search for him, investigating the cases of every man in the district whose circumstances were such that he could go and come and get rid of his bloodstains in secret. And the conclusion we came to was that he and his people were low-class Jews. And the result proved that our diagnosis was right on every point. Now, if we forget about the anti-Semitism that was rife in that statement, it is of note that he lived in the area. He fitted the description of everything else, including being Jewish. So some people would say that this investigator was pointing to our good friend Double H. Yet, there's another, perhaps stronger suspect that he was referring to. And we will be covering that one in a few videos' time. But the point is, they were looking for someone that matched the description of Hyam Hyams. So do I think that Double H is Jack the Ripper? I don't see it myself. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are on this. He certainly fits the description in a couple of ways. He obviously had a disrespect for women. Anyone that is going to attack their own mother and their wife, and we're not just talking about a push here, we're talking a vicious, violent assault, could easily commit these crimes against women that he wouldn't even know. So definitely not justifying those attacks. They don't fit the Jack the Ripper murders. See, when Hyam Hyams was doing those things, he's in a rage. He's just being psychotic. But the Whitechapel murders associated with Jack the Ripper were more clinical. If we think of the double event, someone just in that rage would hardly be able to do that and move off without being heard or seen. I doubt it myself. The Mary Kelly murder, it seemed that she trusted the person in the room. I don't think you'd be trusting this person at all with his reputation or even the way he would conduct himself. Unless he was presenting himself as this super charming person, which, by reports, he could do so. But still, I don't see that he was the one. I am interested in your thoughts though on it, so please put that in the comments. So that brings us to an end of this week's episode of the Pub Test. Thank you very much for watching. If you can, like. If you want to, subscribe. When we hit 500 subscribers, we can put a poll up and you can state who you think Jack the Ripper is. so we can keep a running tally of the different suspects and where they rate. But thank you very much for watching. It genuinely is appreciated. Check out the books. As we say, a third one is on the way. More information coming about that soon. But I'm Owen. You've been watching the Pub Test, and we'll see you on the next one.